How a serious error in a historic building changed my life and revealed secrets no one expected. I'll never forget the sound that changed my life. It was a normal morning at the construction site. The sun was beating down, people were rushing back and forth, and I was in that rush that always accompanied me. I was adjusting a support on the weakest part of the structure when I heard the crack. It was quick, sharp, like a bone breaking. The next instant, the section of the historic wall began to give way. I stood there, stiff, my heart pounding in my throat. Dust rose, the noise drew attention, and before I knew it, people were running toward me. I wanted to go back in time, 2 seconds earlier, just to do everything differently. But the damage was done. The structure was protected, part of a listed heritage site, and I, with my haste and lack of attention, had ruined everything. My name is Raphael, I'm 32 years old, and at the time I worked at a historic building preservation company. It was a job I was proud of, but one I didn't appreciate as much as I should have. I've always been impulsive, the kind of guy who thinks he can solve everything on his own, improvising and let me do it. I like to appear efficient, but deep down, it was carelessness, anxiety, and vanity disguised as self-confidence. I had just made the mistake every professional fears, the one that can't be easily fixed, the one that tarnishes your reputation and haunts you. And the worst part is, knew it as soon as I saw my director's gaze coming my way. Carlos arrived first, with that calm expression that hurt more than a scream. He took a deep breath and simply asked, "Do you understand what you did?" I tried to answer, but my voice wouldn't come out. Anna and Paula were there too, one holding the clipboard, the other looking at me as if in disbelief. I wanted the floor to swallow me. Everything was silent for a few seconds. I heard only the distant sound of machines and the hum of my own thoughts. Fear consumed me, but my pride still tried to find excuses. It was an accident, I thought. It could have happened to anyone. But I knew better. I was in a hurry. The mistake was mine. What followed was a sequence of scenes that felt like a never-ending nightmare. Emergency meetings, people whispering in the hallways, looks that carried more weight than words. João, the head of accounting, tried to defend me. He said everyone makes mistakes, that the company should give me a chance. But the damage was real. The cost was high, the company's name was at risk, and Isabella, the preservation inspector, had already been contacted. When she arrived, I felt the ground collapse again. Her look was technical, but also disappointed. "You know what this means, don't you?" she asked. I nodded, lacking the strength to respond. And there, in that moment, I realized my professional life had become a field of ruins. The following days were the worst of my life. I couldn't sleep. When I closed my eyes, I saw the piece of the structure falling, heard the cracking sound, smelled the dust and old paint. The messages started arriving, people asking what happened, others just walking away in silence. I was called to meetings with lawyers. I attended depositions. I heard my name mentioned with suspicion. Every word hurt. And the worst was seeing colleagues I respected look at me with pity. Miguel, a former boss who had been fired months earlier, texted me, "Now you'll understand what it's like to fall and have to get up without help." That day I hated him. Today I'm grateful. It was weeks of heavy silence. The company put me on leave while they evaluated the case, and I stayed home, alone, trying to pretend I still had some control. But the truth is, I was shattered. I would wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, remembering the crack in the wall and Carlos's expression. I avoided answering calls, afraid to open my email and see my name involved in some lawsuit. I felt too ashamed to leave the house. The guilt came in waves. Sometimes it made me want to cry. Other times it left me paralyzed. I spent days staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had gotten there. Around that time, I realized how people change when you make a mistake. Before the accident, I was seen as the agile guy who solved everything quickly. Afterward, I became the problem, the culprit, the example of what not to do. Some colleagues blocked me, others stopped. responding to messages. Only Anna sent me audio messages every now and then, telling me to hang in there, that things would work out. But I no longer believed it. I couldn't even trust myself anymore. I tried to seek support from my family, but even they seemed to look at me with a mixture of pity and frustration. It was as if I'd let the whole world down at once. One day, I received a court summons. It was the lowest point of my life. The fine was high, and I risked being personally liable for negligence. At that moment, I felt like disappearing. I considered quitting, starting over somewhere else, running away. But something inside me told me that running away would be just another act of cowardice. For the first time, I felt like facing the situation head-on, even if it hurt. I called Carlos and asked to talk. He listened to me silently. I apologized, but he replied, "Sorry isn't enough, Rafael. You need to understand why you got to this point." That kept hammering away at me for days. Little by little, I began to face the mirror, literally. I stood there, observing that tired face, the sunken eyes, the expression of someone who had lost everything. It was difficult to admit that the error wasn't just technical, it was personal. I'd always been impatient, wanting to show my worth, be recognized, stand out. But deep down, what drove me was insecurity. I wanted to prove I was good enough. And in that pursuit, I stopped listening to others, planning calmly, respecting processes, realizing this hurt more than any punishment. It was like discovering that the enemy who destroyed everything had been living inside me all along. That's when I started to change. Slowly, stumblingly, but truly. I went back to studying preservation, rereading technical standards, and taking online courses. I spent days reviewing old reports, trying to understand the signs I'd ignored. I sent messages to colleagues offering sincere apologies, not those rote phrases, but real conversations. Some responded, others didn't. Anna told me the company was still talking about me, and that Carlos recognized my efforts to repair the damage. This gave me strength. For the first time in months, I felt that perhaps there was still a way to rebuild, not the building, but myself. When the company scheduled the final meeting about the case, my hands were sweating so much I could barely hold my phone. I knew it could be the definitive end of my career there. I arrived early, sat in the reception area, and gazed at the old paintings hanging on the walls, ironically full of history, like the ones I should have preserved. When my name was called, I felt a chill rise from my stomach to my throat. Carlos, Paula, and even Isabella were in the room. The atmosphere was tense, but different. There was no anger, only exhaustion. I asked to speak first. I said I wasn't there to justify myself, but to own up. I explained what I'd done, what I'd felt, how I'd understood the extent of the damage. I spoke about my fear, my shame, and my desire to do things differently. When I finished, the silence was heavy. Carlos took a deep breath and replied, "We can't erase the past, but we can decide what to do with it." I left that meeting not knowing what was to come, but with a strange sense of relief. I had faced what I feared most, judgment. For the first time, I stopped running away, and somehow, that freed me. Days later, I received an email from the company saying that despite the formal punishment, I could participate in a reparation project with the technical team. It wouldn't be a position nor a favor. It would be community work, volunteering, accompanying educational restoration processes. I accepted without a second thought. It was my chance to, if not erase the mistake, at least leave something useful in its place. At first, it was humiliating. Being there as the employee who destroyed the property wasn't easy. People looked at me suspiciously, some whispered, and I felt the weight of each look. But I decided I wouldn't respond with pride. I worked in silence, asking questions, listening, learning. I started taking notes again, studying materials and methods I'd previously ignored. I discovered there was a kind of humility that only emerges after we've lost everything. It's when you understand that learning doesn't diminish anyone. On the contrary, it rebuilds you. And that's what began to happen to me, little by little, every day, in that new environment. It was also during this period that I met new people, different from those I'd known before. Simple, dedicated people who treated me without judgment, only with curiosity. One of them, an older restorer named Clovis, told me something I've never forgotten. A mistake is like a fissure. You don't hide it. You fill it with time, patience, and the right material. And if you do it right, it becomes part of history and no longer a source of shame. I've carried that with me for life. It made me understand that what I was experiencing wasn't the end of my career, but a part of it, the most painful and perhaps the most necessary. Little by little, things began to change. I didn't return to my old position, but I gained the opportunity to contribute to technical reports and training on safety and damage prevention. The irony was clear. The guy who made the mistake was now teaching how to avoid it. At first, it sounded strange even to me, but over time, I realized that this was true reparation, transforming what had been destroyed into something that could protect others. I no longer sought recognition. I just wanted to be useful. And for the first time, I felt like I was truly being useful. Over time, I began to realize how life continued even after a mistake. Each day on the construction site was a reminder that I could choose to act differently. I learned to breathe before moving any structure, to plan each step, to listen to my colleagues. What once seemed small now had weight and importance. I felt more attentive, more present, and this gave me a peace I hadn't known existed. I realized that haste and impulsiveness not only harmed me, but almost destroyed relationships I valued. Learning this was painful, but necessary. My relationship with Carlos changed. At first, I felt a paralyzing fear of him. Today, I can see him as a mentor, someone who didn't let me sink, but also didn't shirk responsibility. Paula and Anna began to trust me again, but not immediately. It took consistency, day after day, week after week. Some colleagues still looked at me warily, but with small actions, acknowledging mistakes and dedication, I managed to rebuild the reputation I had lost. It wasn't quick, and I was often tempted to give up, but the idea of becoming the person I'd always admired professionally kept me going. Forgiveness also came gradually, not from others, but from myself. I needed to stop beating myself up and understand that what had happened didn't define me entirely. I began to see my failures as learning experiences, to accept that making mistakes wasn't shameful if it came with responsibility. I began writing down my thoughts, my memories of each mistake, and this helped organize my mind. I didn't want to forget what happened. I wanted to truly learn. Every account I made, every detail I recorded, was a way to rebuild not only my career, but also my self-esteem and confidence. I also discovered the value of patience. I'd always wanted everything fast, results, recognition, status. Now I realized that rebuilding requires time and discipline. One day during an inspection with Isabella, she commented on my progress. She said I was more careful, attentive to detail, and that the way I handled mistakes showed maturity. That gave me butterflies, but a good kind of butterflies. I felt proud of myself, genuinely, without needing anyone to praise me. It was as if I'd found a balance between skill and responsibility, between impulsiveness and conscientiousness. And with that, my personal life began to change as well. I realized that the same mistakes I made at work were reflected outside of work. Impatience, too hasty decisions, selfishness disguised as efficiency. I began to be more present with my family, to truly listen, to reflect before acting. The small daily victories showed me that transformation was possible and that the process of change wasn't limited to work. What once seemed like punishment became a Profound learning experience, teaching me to live more consciously and responsibly, without rushing, but with attention to what truly matters. Today, when I look back, I see how profound the impact of that mistake was. I could have lost myself, given up, or let fear paralyze me. But I decided to face the situation, take responsibility, and rebuild my path. The pain still exists. I feel every failure, every suspicious look that still appears from time to time, but it no longer paralyzes me. I learned that facing the consequences isn't just about paying a price, but also giving yourself the chance to become better. There is no shortcut to redemption. There is effort, patience, and courage. I also learned that asking for help isn't a weakness. At first, I tried to deal with the weight of the mistake alone, and this only increased my anxiety. Accepting guidance from Carlos, listening to Paula, Anna, and even Clovis, accepting criticism and advice was crucial to my evolution. I discovered that rebuilding isn't just technical, but emotional as well. You need to deal with your own guilt, reflect on your attitudes, and change old behaviors. Every step I took, no matter how small, showed me that there was still a path forward, even if difficult. What impacted me most during this process was realizing that no one is defined by a single mistake. I had done something serious, but that didn't have to be my eternal label. Turning what destroyed me into a learning experience was liberating. Today, I act with more care, preparation, attention, and respect. The confidence I regained at work and in my personal life made me understand that even after falling, it's still possible to get back up, more aware, stronger, and more human. If I could speak to my past self, I would say, stop blaming yourself so much, own up, learn, and move on. The pain you feel today is what will guide you tomorrow. Learning to deal with guilt, transform it into motivation, and act responsibly was the greatest lesson I learned. I'm not saying the process is easy, it never is, but it is possible. Every day is an opportunity to do things differently, to make amends, to grow. In the end, what matters isn't the mistake itself, but how you deal with it. I still bear the scars of that moment, but they remind me to be careful, present, and responsible. And most importantly, they remind me that it's possible to start over, even when everything seems lost. Overcoming a mistake isn't about forgetting or pretending nothing happened, but about accepting it, rebuilding, and believing that better days can still come. For anyone going through something similar, there is a path, there is learning, and there is the strength within you to bounce back.